So you're probably absolutely sick to death of hearing me, repeat myself over and over again on those theoretical examples. So let's kind of go through what I think is a pretty clean example here on the 4-hour chart on euro dollar. Okay, so we're going to really try and take our time, go through it slowly, and see not only just how to apply those frameworks with the rules that we follow and how to map them and how mechanical we can be, but let's kind of try now to start having a think about what do these concepts mean in terms of expectations and how we can reprice action and like how we put them all together. That's kind of what we want to start to do now, right? So let's take it slowly. So I've kind of done this for us, right? And there's a few ways you could have arrived to this point of where you've mapped out your swing structure. So I've done it in quite a conservative way. We're essentially viewing that as one swing pullback. That's obviously a break of that swing low, and then this movement up here, all of that being one move, and then that being the swing pullback, and then eventually it shifted bearish. Okay, now there's some slightly different ways you could have got to this point, because you could have viewed that as a swing pullback and whatnot, but I'm going to talk about that in a future lesson. Okay, but for now, let's kind of ignore that and just trust me that this is the swing break of structure. And if that is the case, right, if this is the swing low that we've taken out from here and we've had a break and close below, what's the first thing we need to do once we get that candle closing and finishing? We need to know where is our new swing high, because remember, when the swing trend is bearish and we get that bearish break of structure and we get the candle closure confirming it, remember you have to wait for the candle to close, we instantly, with 100% mechanical certainty, know where the new swing high is, right? And it's the highest point that broke the swing low, right? After the low was obviously printed. So if you want to use a box rule, if that helps, draw a box from where the low was to where it was broken, and then drag it up. And then where's the highest point? We now know. We can put our pretty little circle just above this high here, okay? So that's how you basically find your swing structure. And then what I would recommend you do is you have a line tool like this, and you can pre-save some templates, right? Where I have 4-hour swing strong, and I'll always put that on where my strong swing high is, okay? And all that simply is some text in here. If you double click, it will open up, and you can play around with like the colors and all that stuff, right? And then I just have 4-hour strong, and you can make the text a bit bigger if you want, and you can change which time frames it appears on. For me, I just basically do it on I just want it on the 4-hour chart. I don't want it showing on the other time frames, just to keep my charts nice and clear. But we can worry about that a bit more when we get into multi-time frame analysis. Okay, so bearish swing break of structure. Immediately we want to map where is our new swing high, so we know the new swing range we're within. Okay, we know we're bearish, we know this is our swing high if we've mapped it this way. Okay, so after swing break of structure, what's the first thing you want to be saying to yourself in the back of your mind? We expect a swing pullback, right? After a boss, we expect a swing pullback on that time frame, right? Now, obviously that might not happen straight away, but that's okay. It's more just we have to start anticipating that one may kick in, right? And we have to keep our eyes open for that. So whether that's going to affect your decisions on whether you want to keep shorting this, you may always want to be a bit more aggressive, or maybe you don't want to short it at all, and maybe you just want to wait for that pullback to start, okay? So purely from a market structure standpoint, we're not going to worry about liquidity. We're not going to worry about supply and demand and all of these other fun things we're about to learn, right? Purely from a market structure standpoint, what's probably the bare minimum we need to look for to anticipate the swing pullback may be ready to kick in? We want to wait for a bullish change of character, right? Where we get that fractal structure shifting bullish, okay? But if that happens, what does that signal? It doesn't signal the start of the swing pullback, does it? It signals the start of an internal pullback, or at least an internal pullback. It's only when we get the IBOS that confirms the start and end of a swing pullback, okay? So let's zoom in a little bit and let's pay price forward, and we can kind of go through the actual examples of how it goes. Okay, so that candle obviously broke the prior candle's low, so we know the fractal structure is continuing to the downside. This candle fails to break the previous candle's low, okay? So we're getting that fractal pullback. Now in the live market, when I'm looking at this and I'm mapping my charts, I'm not going to be mapping out like, this is the current active fractal low and having that all drawn out, just because I find it unnecessary and it's just going to clog your charts. Obviously, when you're trying to learn and do the exercises, it makes sense, but just kind of showing you how I would reprice action, I'd be aware of it, but I'm not going to be marking this out, okay? So I know we're getting a bit of a fractal pullback, but I'm not going to mark out my fractal structure. But I'm not going to put on, my pretty gray circle on this low yet to define that as a swing low. Why not? Well, because I'm waiting for price to pull back a significant amount relative to recent price action to show me, okay, if we get a pullback like that, okay, that's pretty sizable, then I'm going to mark out that this is my swing low, okay? But I'm going to wait for that. For now, all I'm thinking is, okay, we're just getting a bit of a fractal pullback here, right? Bit of a pause in price action, that's to be expected. Okay, again, we're just pausing, nothing's going on, and then we continue the fractal movement to the downside, right? We continue to down. So then we keep going. Okay, then we get a fractal pullback here. So that's to be expected, right? Not going on, and then we get a continuation of that fractal move. Now, what you can mark out, and sometimes what I'll do in the live market, is I will mark out the current active fractal high with my chalk line. So I've got a pre-saved template for our chalk, just a dashed line, okay? Because what that tells me is when that high goes, straight away I know, oh, well, there's a change of character, right? Then it's occurred. So that's what you can do, right? Is you can track the fractal highs just to see where that change of character would be, okay? Now, you can see if we zoom out, right? If you press Alt and R, that will reset your chart, or you can double click the axes. You see these little pulls in price action? Relative to recent price action, they're nothing, right? They're just fractal pullback. So I wouldn't even map these as internal structure really, but obviously you can do, but that's literally all I'm thinking at the moment is we're just coming to the downside, but we haven't even had a bullish chalk yet. Again, then we continue down. So you see how this candle failed to break the previous candle's low. So we've had that fractal pullback, and then we've continued to the downside and we've taken out that low. So now this becomes your new active fractal high. So that would be the high to go that we need a bullish change of character. So again, we're just moving to the downside. Nothing to do just yet. We haven't had a bullish chalk just yet. Still haven't broken that fractal high. And then we continue to the downside, okay? So we've had another fractal continuation. So now we can adjust our fractal high to the last candle that failed to break the previous candle's low. So if we look back from where the break occurred, that broke the low, that broke the low, that broke the low, that broke the low, that broke the low. This candle didn't break that candle's low. So we now know that that inside bar is the current active fractal high. So that would be the high that price would need to break for a change of character. But again, let's zoom out and look at price action. So you can see here, it's somewhat of a sizable pullback, right? It's pretty big, but compared to relative price action, I wouldn't call it a swing pullback. But I probably would be happy to kind of mark that out as internal structure, right? You can see it's a bit of a pullback, but it's not quite, a swing pullback, right? So you could mark that out, as an internal breaker structure. So you could use, say, a dotted line for this if you wanted to map that out, right? And essentially what that would mean is if price broke up above here, above that high, I would classify that as an internal breaker structure. And it just so happens in this instance, it lines up with where the chalk line is, okay? So again, because that's quite, somewhat of a sizable pullback, not significant enough for me to be swing structure, but I'd call that more internal structure, that when you get a break of that low, okay, that's your internal high. If price now was to move up and break up and close above that, for me, that would be a bullish IBOS. It just so happens it's also where the chalk line is. So you'd have a bullish chalk and a bullish IBOS. And for me, that would be that structural signal that the swing pullback has started. Okay. Now this is kind of a key difference that I appreciate some people may get a bit confused. So a bullish IBOS for me will signal that the swing pullback has started, but it will not necessarily signal that my swing low is in place and that I can draw my circle on, okay? And the reason why is, let's say right price comes up now, right, and it breaks and closes above our internal high, and we get that bullish IBOS here, that pullback, right, that could happen, and then price could literally just then continue to the downside, right? And for me, that still might not look like big enough of a pullback to be considered a swing pullback relative to recent price action, right? Because I want to see something bigger like that, or I want to see a big swing pullback. So hopefully you can see now when we get the bullish IBOS, if that occurs, it's a signal that the swing pullback is starting, okay? But that doesn't then mean that defines that I now draw this as my swing low. To actually know where my swing low is in a bearish market, I need there to be a big enough of a pullback. Okay, so there's a subtle difference there. The IBOS signals the start of the pullback may be happening, but it doesn't necessarily define that it actually is the swing pullback. Okay, for that, I need there to be a significant of enough of a move. Hopefully that's clear, but we'll go through examples and maybe that will make a bit more sense, okay? So at this point, we're still moving to the downside. We've had an internal pullback, not big enough for it to be a swing pullback, and we're continuing down. That candle fails to break zoom in a bit, the previous candle's low, right? So we've had a fractal pullback, and then we continue to the downside. So now we can move our fractal line there, okay? And that would be our chalk level. Now what you can also do is you can use, you could like draw lines out for I don't have a template for the 4-hour chart, I don't think, no, but you can use this for like, you could draw that as your internal high, right? I'm just going to change this to 4H, bear with. All right, and this is what you can do in the live market as well, just so you know where kind of your internal structure is, and you know that's the strong internal high because it took out the internal low, right? And then this is your fractal structure. So this would be the high that we would be waiting for price to close above to give us that bullish IBOS to signal that, that structural confirmation that the swing pullback may be starting. Okay, so now we have a bullish change of character, right? So this is the first early indication, right? It's the first time that kind of structure is starting to shift bullish. It's the first indication that we may be getting that swing pullback, right? But we don't have confirmation until we get a candle closure above the internal high. Chalk, all that signals is the start of the internal pullback, right? Because we could come into this 4-hour strong internal high. We could then get a bearish chalk. And what would that signal? It signals the start and end of internal pullbacks. So that would signal that this internal pullback is finished, right? And now we'd be ready to take out that weak internal low. So that's all change of character is. So you could see that and you could, have other confluence and you could go, okay, now I want to buy in anticipation that we may get the bullish IBOS, right? You don't have to wait for the IBOS to try and play the swing pullback. It's just that we don't have confirmation. We don't have structural alignment until we get that for the swing pullback to occur, okay? So at this point, we've got a bullish change of character. We can look for longs, but you have to manage your expectation that it could just be an internal pullback. Then we could get a bearish change of character, right? And then we'd be ready to continue the overall bearish internal and swing trend, okay? So move to the upside. So, you could be getting long here thinking, okay, swing pullbacks starting, right? And then it just takes out the low there, right? So that's why change of character is the most aggressive signal. And because a lot of people would potentially see that change of character, they'd get in long here. And then depending on how tight the stop is, right, they might get stopped out with that spike because price does just break the low there, I believe. All right, it's subtle, but you can see, yeah, it just trades through it. Okay, so we've got a bearish change of character, but this is one of those complex examples where, excuse me, price came down. It took the low with this candle. So as it breaks that low at that exact moment, remember, we don't have to wait for candle body close for change of character because as soon as price trades below that in the live market, we only need a wick break. So at that exact moment that price trades below that low, this becomes our new fractal high, right? So you can then also draw your chalk line there. And then in the exact same candle, price then moves back to the upside, okay? So if you're not sure and you just come here and you haven't seen what happened and you just see this big candle, you need to check what order of events happened. Because if I remove these lines, right, and I bring it back to here, all right, at this moment, the fractal structure is bullish, okay? Because we had that pullback, we had the bullish chalk, right? So from a fractal structure perspective, you'd expect that movement. So if that happens, if price doesn't break this low and it continues to the upside, excuse me, that's just a fractal bullish continuation, right? We had a fractal higher high, pull back to form that fractal high low and continue to the movement, right? But if it takes the low first, then what is that? That's a bearish chalk because the fractal structure shifted from bullish to bearish, okay? So that's why it matters if one candle, basically if you see a candle that's broken that high and that low like this, you have to figure out what happened first, okay? Because if price was here and it pulled up like that, here, I'll just show you. It's probably a bit easier if we talk through it, okay? And we do this. In this instance, let's check what happened on the lower time frame. So if we go down to the 15 minute, hopefully it'll load back, all right? We can see, that actually, so I think I was wrong here. It does break the high and then break the low, okay? So I think our bullish, if I go back to the 4H, bear with. Okay, so that's our bullish change character. Just gonna put this in a minute so we can see it. So we come up, and I think when we go and look on the lower time frames now, what we'll see is when this candle finished printing, which would be 6:15 when the next one starts. Oh, sorry, it's a 4-hour candle, so in 10 a.m. I think what happens is price comes up, right? So it continues that fractal movement, right? So then at that moment, this would become the fractal low, and then we get a bearish change of character. I think that's what happens, right? So we come up and then we come down. So let's take a look. Yeah, so we can see that. So we had the bullish change of character, right? We pull back. We obviously don't break the low. And then what happens next? Do we break this low or do we break the high next? You can see if we draw our lines across, the first thing to happen is we break the high. So what does that mean? It means the fractal structure pulled back and it continued to move. And then in that same 4-hour candle, as soon as price breaks that high, remember, we can then mark that out as our new 4-hour low. So in that same 4-hour candle, we then get a bearish change of character, okay? So this is why chalk is super, super aggressive and it can change frequently, okay? So what's actually happened here? Sorry, I know that took a little bit of time, but sometimes you have to investigate and figure it out. And this is a good example for you guys to understand what's happened, right? So we had the fractal continuation. So at that moment, that price broke this high here. This would have then become the low. And then that same candle, right, came back down. So we went up and then we came down and then we took out the low. So we've now had a bearish change of character, right? So this is what I was saying about, you have to understand kind of when to use change of character as useful information. For me, this is just showing volatility. It's just showing indecision, It's not really giving me much information. Whereas this change of character here was useful, right? Because we've had a bearish IBOS, right? And then we get that bullish chock there. That signals, okay, some bullish pressure coming in. We're probably going to get a bit of an internal pullback now. But when you kind of get this, it's just indecision and price just shopping around, right? Okay, cool. So let's play price forward a little bit. And then we move to the upside, right? So this is what I mean. When you get kind of choppy, volatile price action, right, there's a bullish change of character. So it's all a bit messy. And this is the types of chocks that I wouldn't really be paying much attention to. Okay, and then we get a move to the downside. Now, so what I would do in the live market, like I said, is I would draw that one on and I go, okay, we've had a bearish IBOS, we've had a bullish change of character. I'm expecting a bit of an internal pullback. And then see these chocks here, I wouldn't even bother drawing them on or trying to, like, I don't care. It's just messy price action. We're getting a bit of an internal pullback. And that's all that would be, right? Bearish IBOS, we get the bullish change of character to signal the start of the pullback. We get that a bit more of an internal pullback now, right? That's kind of a relative size to this size pullback here. That makes sense, right? Internal pullback, lower low, internal pullback, lower low. Okay, so we've had another bearish internal breaker structure here. Once we get the candle body closure, okay, so now we can move this down to be our strong internal high because that's the highest point that broke that low. Okay, so hopefully you're following me so far. So remember, this whole time we are within this bearish swing structure. We had that bearish break. We know that's our swing high, so this becomes our swing high all the way up here. After this bearish breaker structure here, let's zoom in a little bit, we are expecting a swing pullback that can kick in at any time. But this is a perfect example of where price can fall for quite a while before we get that swing pullback. Not always. Sometimes, price will literally break and we'll get that pullback straight away. So that's what I was saying. Have it in the back of your mind that the swing pullback can kick in, but we need to wait for structural confirmation, right? To help us to know when it's happening or when it's starting. So this whole time, even the fractal structure just continued to move to the downside, right? We come down, we pull back, we come down, kind of have this little fractal structure. Okay, now we start to get a bit more of a sizable pullback, but obviously relative to recent price action, it's not swing structure. That for me is just internal structure. Then we continue to the downside. So we get that bearish IBOS, then we have a fractal pullback, get that bullish change of character. For me, that just signals we're going to start, or it is the signal that's just going to start. We're going to get that internal pullback. We get some messy chocks within here, but that's when I'm not paying attention. It doesn't mean anything, right? That's when you have to learn that chock is kind of irrelevant. If you start taking highs and lows from within here, just realize that we're having a bit of a messy internal pullback. And then what happens, then we continue to the downside. We don't break the strong internal high. We get that bearish IBOS, and now we have a new internal range, okay? So now this is the high that we need to see price break and close above to get that bullish IBOS to signal the start of the potential swing pullback. And that's it. And again, if you want to keep labeling where the chock level would be, where would it be in this case? Well, if we look back, where's the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's low? It's the inside bar, okay? So that would be your chock level, right? Now we can keep going down, so price pulls back, just doing nothing. So now we get a bullish change of character, but again, is that super useful? Because it's right near into the strong internal high. It's a sign, it's some sign that the fractal structure has shifted bullish, but I'm going to be waiting really for price now to close above this and see if we can get that bullish IBOS, right? So let's see what happens next. And then we break and close above it, okay? So now what happens is now we have a bullish IBOS, right? So that'd be a 4-hour IBOS. So I can use a dotted line for IBOS here. Again, I'll just be a bit consistent. There we got the 4-hour IBOS there, okay? And again here. So now the bullish IBOS is the structural confirmation that the swing pullback is starting, okay? Now, remember the slight difference I was saying though is I can only draw on my gray circle to mark out where my swing low is once the size of that pullback I deem to be significant relative to recent price action, okay? So the IBOS is just a signal that it started. And in some instances, right, you could be like, oh yeah, we've already had like a big pullback as well, so I'm happy to mark it straight away. Sometimes you might not be so sure just yet, because remember what could happen is you could get a bullish IBOS, but price could literally just continue down again. And you may think, relative to recent price action, well, actually that wasn't really that big of a pullback, so you're not so sure. And you'd wait for that bullish IBOS, and now, okay, that's quite a big pullback relative to recent price action, right? That's a big pullback. Okay, now I'm ready to mark it. So hopefully you can see there is a difference there. The IBOS signals that it's starting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready to mark out your swing low in this instance, okay? So let's play price forward a little bit. Okay, now, right, I would say if you zoom out, right, that's a pretty sizable pullback compared to relative price action. So now I have a lot of confidence to mark out this on, as my swing low. As obviously I'm using discretion to deem what is significant in terms of the size of that swing pullback there, right? And now I know what swing range we are working within, okay? So this is the swing high in this instance, and this is the swing low. The internal structure has shifted bullish. So now what do we expect? Now we expect, right, if I draw it like this, right, now we expect this internal structure to remain bullish to facilitate the swing pullback, okay? Now, if the swing trend is going to change, and maybe the swing, because eventually the swing trend is going to shift bullish, right? It can't stay bearish forever. If that's going to happen, what does the internal structure need to do if the swing trend is going to shift bullish? The internal structure needs to stay bullish the entire time. So if you see this in a live market and you're waiting for the swing lower high to form because you think the swing trend is going to continue, but if you see that these strong lows keep holding, obviously this is a strong low because it takes out the high. This is a strong low because it takes out the high. If price comes into here again and continues up and it fails to break this low, well then that's what you can expect, right? If it keeps staying bullish, then we're probably going to stay bullish. But if we get that bearish IBOS and we break the low, we break the strong low, now what's happened? Now the internal structure has shifted bearish to realign itself with the swing structure. So now we expect the swing pullback is over and we're ready to take out the weak swing low. Okay. But remember, what's the other key part that really helps us with trading decisions? When we take out that strong low, that becomes a strong internal high. So now when price pulls back, we expect that price will not break these highs. So now we can try and short these lower highs and we expect these bearish internal ranges to stay bearish, right? We expect those strong highs to hold until it takes out the low. And that's really, really key, okay? Because it helps us build trading decisions, okay? So again, I appreciate I've gone through this very, very slowly and it can seem a bit pedantic. In the live market and everything, you'll be able to do this super, super quickly and it'll become simple, but it's just key to really kind of go over all of the small differences just to kind of hopefully squash any questions or doubts or concerns you may have, right? So the internal structure is now shifted bullish, right? But the swing trend is bearish. So we now know we are in the swing pullback phase, okay? Now, typically when you get swing pullbacks, they can be quite corrective and you can get quite messy. You can get like, price, the fractal structure you can have lots of change of characters and it can be quite slow. That's just the nature of price action. Very typically what you'll get, okay, is when the swing trend is say bearish, is you'll get impulsive moves to the downside, and then you get quite choppy and corrective and tricky price actions to trade for the pullbacks, and then pretty strong impulsive moves to the downside, and then again, quite corrective pullbacks, right? For the most part, that's generally how the market will move. And then the opposite for when it's bullish, right? You get impulsive moves up after the break of structure. You're kind of going to get those messy kind of choppy corrective pullbacks. You can get fake signals and it can be a bit harder. And then you typically get like quite strong impulsive moves. And then again, right? And that's just the nature of price action. So when the swing trend is bearish and we're going to be looking for longs to play this swing pullback, we have to understand that counter swing trend trading is obviously a bit trickier because we're against the overall swing trend, we're against the overall momentum. But if we're going to trade that pullback, if we're going to trade counter trend, we want to try and do it earlier, right? We want to be trying to do it now to play the pullback up to this, but we'll talk about this in a lot more detail later, okay? So, like I said, now expectation is that these bearish internal ranges will continue to facilitate that swing pullback, okay? Now, seeing here, let me just bring it back a little bit. I kind of don't want to go through every single bit of price action to mark out on every single chalk, but I'll go through some of them just to kind of clear any doubts. So after internal break of structure, what do you expect? We expect an internal pullback. What will signal the internal pullback? A change of character will signal that, okay? So at the moment, this is obviously like your fractal high, right? So if price breaks that, which it does with one candle, so this is again another slightly tricky one where price takes the high. So at that moment that it takes the high, your inside bar becomes a low because that was the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's high, right? Because you can see here, price comes up, it pulls back because it fails to break that candle's high. Then in the next candle, it goes up and it takes the high. So at that moment, this becomes your fractal low. So that should bear a change of character, okay? And if I draw this on, it'll become a little bit clearer on the lower timeframes. So M15, sorry, 4-hour chalk. And then a 4-hour change of character here, right? That should bear a change of character. And there's your 15. Sorry, one sec. It's because I've got my templates to not show on the other timeframes. There we go. And there we go. Cool, so then go down to 15 men. Okay. So you can see here, if you look at the order, did I draw that properly? Okay, so that candle starts at 6 a.m. So if we look down here, what happened? This is a good example to show you kind of have to investigate sometimes. Okay, so this is a bit of a tricky one. So this is where price actually pulled back first and then took the high and then took the low. So in this instance, actually, what happened, and this is why investigating the lower time frames is key, I had to think about that for a second, is when we had that inside bar, The next thing that happened once this candle finished printing was price actually broke this candle's low. So that means that price continued the pullback and then it went to the upside. So actually we haven't had a change of character. We've just had a continuation of the move, okay? So at this point, this would be the low that needs to go to get your change of character. And then that happens in the next candle. So that's where your chock is in this instance, okay? So again, that was a bit of a tricky one, but hopefully you can understand why. It's because price pulled back, oops. Price pulled back like this, then it took the high, so that then becomes a low at that point, right? Once we break the high, and then we come down, okay? So swing trend is bearish. Again, I appreciate this is a bit over the top, but swing structure is bearish. We finally had that bullish IBOS to signal the start of the swing pullback. Okay, after a bullish IBOS, what do we expect? We expect an internal pullback. What will signal the internal pullback? A change of character, which we eventually got over here. So now what is the expectation? Now the expectation is that we're going to get that internal pullback. But remember, this is our internal low, right? Because this is the low that took out the high. Just delete the chock here, just keep it a little bit clearer. Okay, so now what can happen is price can pull back, but from an internal structure perspective, we expect that this low will not be broken and we'd expect it to continue to take out that high, okay? So this is where we don't have structural alignment, because if we look at our swing structure, when I put on this circle here for our swing structure, this is a weak swing low, right? Because obviously it hasn't broken the swing high. But from an internal structure perspective, let me use little different dots here. Bear with me 1 second. From a internal structure perspective, we use these blue dots, okay? All right. This down here is a strong internal low, okay? Now, this is when you don't have alignment, and this is what can be tricky because, like I keep saying, this is your internal structure. So this is our internal high, this is our internal low. So from an internal structure perspective, we expect a strong low to hold, but from a swing structure perspective, it's a weak low. So it's a weak swing low, but a strong internal low, okay? So sometimes you can have price pull back and swing structure will just be more strong, right? The pullback's over and we'll go, but sometimes it will hold, okay? So we have to see what happens. So we've had the bearish change of character, we're expecting the swing pullback and price starts to pull back, okay? And fails to break and close above the high, right? That's what we need to see for an IBOS. Now, there will be more changes of character in here, but this is again where I'm not going to be paying much attention to them because price is just choppy, it's moving sideways, you can get multiple changes of character. There's not much point in mapping it all out and we'll be here all day, right? It's not useful information. This is when price action is just a bit choppy and corrective, which can often happen when we're getting those swing pullbacks. So in the live market, these will be those tricky periods that will test you where impatient people will give a lot of their hard-earned profits back to the market where there is no real clear intention. The price action is taking highs and lows and you can get chopped around a lot, okay? It might be a little bit clearer in the lower time frames. You might be able to do a bit more quick in and out ping pong intra-session. But typically when you see this sort of price action and you'll be seeing lots of change of characters within here, that's when you just have to recognize and take a message from the market that actually there's no clear conditions here. So I'm going to wait for there to be clearer intentions and wait for the market to just be a bit clearer. There's no other scenario than that. So now we're starting to break out of that little range a bit more. It's getting a bit more clear, okay? But remember, at this point, what we're expecting from an internal structure perspective, we're just expecting that pullback and then looking to go. So kind of when we clear out of this mess, now what you can start to think about is, okay, now change of character would be a bit more useful to look for. Because if we came down like this, we had a fractal pullback, and then we got a bullish change of character here, what would that signal? That would signal the end of the internal pullback. And now change of character becomes a bit more of useful information, right? Because now we can go, okay, bullish chock. Now let's look to try and target at least as high with the potential we could have that deeper swing pullback. Okay, whereas when it's in here and you're marking the chock there and then maybe a chock here, chock wherever it is, I'm not going to do it accurately. That's when I'm not bothered. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's not as relevant. Whereas when we're moving up here nice and strong and then we got the bearish chock here, okay, well that's the start of what we're expecting the pullback. Now we kind of pull back a bit and we're down here. Okay, now I'm probably expecting that pullback's going to end. So now we get the chock, it's more relevant. Okay, that's kind of a key point of when to pay attention to chock and when not to. So let's see what happens. Pull back. And then we get a break of that low. So if we're looking for the change of character, this would be the high that we need to see go, okay? And then we get a bullish chock, okay? So now I'll be thinking that signals the end, likely end, not guaranteed, but the likely end of this internal pullback. And now price is ready to take out this weak internal high to continue to the upside. And now potentially we can look for longs, to try and get from within here, right? And what you can expect is you can get, whoops, definitely don't want that. You can expect sometimes price to then make a series of higher highs and higher lows, right, to then take out the high. But you see in here, sorry, I didn't mean to shout there, but I get excited. We got a bullish change of character, right? And then we come up, and then we get a fractal pullback, and then we come up, and then we get a bearish chalk. So yes, it's not a good sign, and that could mean then we're getting a deeper pullback. But like if you read too much into all of these charts, when ultimately we're moving sideways in a range, that's when, you know, I don't weigh too much importance on them. I'm aware of them. I'd mark it out. It's definitely a bearish confluence to signal that potentially we're maybe going to get another leg down for sure. But it's again knowing that it's not super relevant, because when you just look at price action, it's moving sideways. Okay, and then we eventually, let's see, get a break and closure. I think it happened around here. And definitely has now above the internal high. Okay, so we get another bullish IBOS. Our new internal low becomes the lowest point that took out the high. Just the exact same way we would map swing structure. Look back, where's the lowest point? And now you can mark out your new internal range, right? So this becomes your new strong internal low. So again, just going to kind of do a quick summary. We've had a swing breaker structure. After swing breaker structure, what do you expect? We expect a swing pullback. What signals a swing pullback? We wait for an internal breaker structure. We had that bullish IBOS. Right, we've had the pullback and now we've had another breaker structure. So what we're expecting price to pull back again and continue to the upside. But remember, swing structure is king. Swing structure is more important, right? Swing structure is at the top, then you have internal structure, and then you have fractal structure in terms of importance. So yes, the internal trend is bullish, and yes, we expect from an internal structure perspective that these strong lows will hold, but eventually, right, that swing pullback is going to finish. We expect this strong high not to break, and eventually this is going to change trend, okay? So that's what I was saying. We can trade this internal structure and we can look to get longs and catch these internal high lows, but we always have to be aware in the back of our minds that the higher that price pulls back up into these levels, which we'll talk about with more confidence with supply and demand and premium prices and all that fun stuff, you have to be thinking, okay, here's a better way to think about it. What is the objective of internal structure? In this instance, the objective of the internal structure is to facilitate a swing pullback. So as we start to realize that swing pullback is probably, coming to an end, then, you have to be worried that at any point this could shift bearish, okay? So I'm going to speed this up a little bit now and be a little bit quicker. I don't want to go through every little bit of price action because obviously this will be an hour-long video. But if we had this IBOS that would be in the live market, we go, okay, let's keep our eye out for a bearish change of character. We should be on here, and that will signal the start of the next internal pullback. So let's see what happens. Then we get it. Okay, now we're expecting an internal pullback. So at this point, you could go, okay, we've had a bearish chart. Maybe the swing pullback is starting to end, and maybe we can look for that movement, but we don't have confirmation of that until what? Until this low goes. We need the bearish IBOS to confirm that. Whoops. So let's see what happens. I'll do this a bit more quicker. Again, I'm not going to mark on every single change of character, but we come in towards this low, come into near the strong low. What do we get? We get the bullish shock there. Okay, so that's a pretty good sign. Potentially that new internal high low is ready, and now we can expect price to do what? To take out the weak internal high, right? So you can see how it's the same framework, but we're just applying it to the internal price action. If I draw that on over here, okay. And that's just kind of, the useful areas in which you use chalk. And then you can look for longs to try and take out the weak internal high up here, okay? And you may want to have templates here that says weak internal high and strong internal low and all those things, if it just helps you to know what range you're playing within, right? And again, it's a bit of a tricky range. This is quite tricky price action to trade, it's quite range bound. That's what I was saying. When you're playing those swing pullbacks, that can very often be what happens. But you see how if I hide all the analysis, there's a tool over here on the left hand side you can't see off screen. It can temporarily delete or it just hides all your analysis. You can see what's happening. Price is just moving sideways. It's taking the highs, retracing, taking the lows, retracing. It's choppy price action. But if you apply our mechanical framework to it, you see how you can make a little bit more sense of it. Now, I'm not saying it will be easy to trade and easy to make money out of. You're probably going to take a few hits in here, and it's probably going to get a bit confusing. You might get chucked around a bit, especially on the lower time frames on an intraday basis. But you can always come back to this framework and have a better understanding of, on the basis of probabilities, right? We can see that this is the more likely case of what's happening. So you're not always going to get nice pullbacks, then, chalk, okay, straight away we can get in long and target here. You might get thrown around a little bit. But it's not always about being able to perfectly trade it. It's about having a framework to base trade ideas around and have a higher probable expectation of what is more likely to happen. And we knew that when we pulled back into this strong internal low and we got a bullish change of character, it was pretty likely the internal pullback was over and price is probably going to start to make its way to target this high. And then we can look for trade ideas in here from within here to try and target that high. And that's why we don't want to be shorting from this high, because we know that price is probably ready to want to come up here, right? As soon as we get that bullish IBOS, because we get a break in candle closure, what can we do? We can move this to the new internal low, which is the lowest point that took out the high. Remember, again, you can use the box rule. It's the same with the tunnel structure, swing structure. From where the high breaks to where the high form to where it breaks, where's the lowest point from within there, it's here, right? That's the lowest point of that pullback that becomes our new internal structure. Okay, and we come to the upside. Now there's no change of character here because where would that have to be? It would have to be, where was the last candle to fail to break the prior candle's low? It was this inside bar, but if we draw it across, we can see that this candle traded lower, so that's one of those scenarios in which you need to move it along, okay? So change of character is not always going to be nearby to signal it, and that can just be the case, right? Now there's other confluence in here we can start to anticipate where that swing pullback may start to end before we get the IBOS, okay? So you don't have to wait for a bearish IBOS in order to try and short this and target this low. You don't have to wait for the IBOS. That's not what we're saying here. It's just that the IBOS is when we have confirmation that pullback is over, and it's much higher probability that now price is ready to take out the low, okay? I do want to make that very, very clear. You don't have to wait for that. You can get in before, but it's once we have that bearish IBOS that confirms that the pullback has finished, right? Okay. So what ends up happening is we get a bearish change of character, and then the strong internal low starts to hold, okay? And we then get a bullish change of character, right? So see here how this takes that fractal high. Why is that a bullish change of character? Because you can see this candle failed to break the previous candle's low. So we had a fractal pullback, and then we took the high. So as we come into this strong low and we see a bullish change of character, purely just from the confluence that we know at the moment, single time frame analysis, just looking at structure, you would say that's a pretty good sign that internal pullback is now over, and now we could anticipate, right, that we're now ready to take out the weak high. And that is absolutely true. It's absolutely the case, but you just have to understand, again, remember, you have to build a portfolio of evidence based on the confluence that you use to know, when things are likely to play out and when not. And in this case, remember what I was saying the whole time, the deeper we have that pullback, the higher the probability that the swing pullback has now likely finished and we're ready to continue that movement. So you always have to be aware in the back of your mind that yes, this is a strong internal low, but at some point this is going to fail. We are going to get that bearish IBOS, and then we are going to be ready to go, okay? And there will be other confluence that you're going to learn soon that will help us to anticipate that ahead of time, okay? So in this instance, what happens, we get a bullish change of character, it pulls back a little bit, okay? And then we get the bearish change of character, and then we get the bearish IBOS. So now when this happens, this is when we have that true structural alignment, okay? Again, going to zoom out. We've had the end of the swing pullback. We've had the bearish IBOS. So now the expectation is that this becomes our strong internal high. We expect price to pull back and not break that high. And price is now ready to take out that weak swing low. Okay. So let me just play this forward a little bit, and then we'll kind of summarize it in a bit of more of a succinct manner. And you can see price breaks and closes below that low there. Okay. So that took quite a long time to go through. I appreciate that, but I kind of wanted to go through all the little details, and I try my best to kind of think of the questions that may come up. Now, this is the type of thing in which it will become very, very second nature, and you'll be able to see it straight away, and you'll have all of the rules in your head, and it will make complete sense. And obviously when this is happening in the live market, like these are 4-hour candles. This will take, from here to here, that's what, 39 days. So it plays out very, very slowly, okay? So you don't have to think super, super quickly when you're analyzing these timeframes, right? You'll have a long time to think about it and see how it plays out, okay? But what is the overall framework we'll go through? Let me try and be as succinct and clear as possible, but also, relay the rules. We get our swing breaker structure here. All right, so we know that this is our swing high. As soon as we have that candle body closure, straight away we look for the highest point, and we can mark out our swing high straight away. That is 100% mechanical. When we have that bust, we have to start saying in the back of our mind that we are expecting a swing pullback that can start to kick in. To kind of confirm from a structural perspective that swing pullback may be starting, we look for a bullish IBOS, okay? We can also keep our eyes out for bullish changes of character, but all they signal is the start and end of a swing pullback, because after that bust, if price is coming down like this, you get a little bit of a fractal pullback, and then you get a bullish change of character. You can look for longs, but you have to appreciate, especially when momentum is strong, that you're trying to catch a falling knife with just a chalk, right? You can get stopped out a lot. Again, you can take a lot of losses. So that's why we wait for a bit more of a sizable pullback that isn't quite big enough to be swing structure. And then if price breaks that and we get that bullish IBOS, okay, now that's a lot more confirmation that we're going to likely get that deeper pullback, okay? Now, one variation of what I just went through is sometimes you won't get an internal pullback in the leg like that and you get an IBOS. Sometimes what will happen is price will be like you get fractal pullbacks. It's very, very impulsive like this, but then price does actually pull back quite a lot, right? It's quite a big pullback and then it does this and then it does that. So there wasn't an IBOS here, okay, but you get it here. And that's the example I showed you here, I believe. Here, yeah, like that's the bearish example, right? Where there wasn't actually an internal pullback in the leg, but you get quite a big pullback here and then the IBOS is there. And then you can get the scenario that I drove in here. Obviously this is bullish, but you do get an internal pullback in the leg, okay? So, you know, you kind of just have to read between the lines of sort of where you deem to be the IBOS, which will kind of come with time and experience with that, okay? But yeah, we'll go through tons and tons of examples over, you know, the coming lessons throughout the course and through all of the content that we do in the photon service. Okay, and this will come with time and experience. So, like I said, right, we started to have price coming down, and then I don't think there was even a bullish change of character until here. But remember, at that point, we get that bullish chalk. We know this is our internal high. All we're expecting is a bit of an internal pullback, so we kind of mess around a bit, get that internal pullback, and then we get another bearish IBOS. So now we know that was an internal pullback. This is our new internal structure. And then we shift bullish. We get that internal break here, right? Then we get the internal pullback. Again, pretty messy price action, but I've kind of gone through that. Kind of told you to manage your expectations on how much weight to apply on chocks from within there. But then as we get the bullish change of character here, after kind of breaking out that some consolidation, signals the end of this pullback, and then we're ready to take out that high. After a break of structure, what do we expect? We expect an internal pullback. It pulls down into the strong internal low. We then get a bullish change of character, signaling the end of that internal pullback, right? And now price is ready to go on and take out that high. So then this becomes our new strong internal low because that's the lowest point that took out the high. But eventually the internal structure is going to shift bearish, right? Why? Because it did what? It just shifted bullish to facilitate the swing pullback. Once it's likely that swing pullback has occurred, which again, we'll talk about in future lessons, how you can anticipate this ahead of time. Now it's ready to shift bearish, but it's only once it shifts bearish that we have true confirmation that swing pullback is over and price is ready to take out this week low. And what you'll notice is often when you get that alignment, price, not always, but price often doesn't pull back that deep. Like you won't get big opportunities a lot for it to come all the way back because, you know, it's all systems going out and it's ready to take out that low. So that's why kind of counter trend or counter swing trend trading, when you want to play those swing pullbacks, it's ideal to try and get, you know, do it earlier on in the move because that's when you can get the bigger risk to reward moves. But the more we pull back up towards, you know, again, I don't want to talk about confidence that you don't know yet, but the deeper we have that pullback, obviously the higher the probability that pullback is going to have finished. And then that's where, you know, trying to keep buying up here gets harder and harder. And that's why then when we actually get, you know, the bearish IBOS here and the internal structure has realigned bearish with the swing structure, that's definitely when counter trend trading becomes very, very low probability, okay? Because as you'll learn, right, there are demand levels around here and things and price can come in. It can give you little bounces on the lower time frames. But you have to understand now, like you are buying against everything being bearish. Like everything's bearish at this point. And this is where like people who try to play those counter trend pullbacks get burnt a lot more rather than when you're doing it over here, when you can play the pullback. But once the pullback's complete and we shift bearish, right, this is where you probably don't want to think about buying until we get the break of structure. Because when we take out that low, that's when buying becomes higher probability. Why? Because then you can start to expect that swing pullback. But obviously we're not going to jump in long straight away. We're going to go through the process that we did over here, right? We're going to wait for structure to shift, okay? Like obviously you can play price forward, you can see we start to get changes of character, right? And again, you can start to look to play, you know, these pullbacks, right? So on and so forth. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully kind of, you know, you start to see the framework. There's obviously a little bit to it. Price action can be complex in some scenarios. You can obviously get a lot of changes of character, but, you know, don't try and get it absolutely perfect in the moment and feel like you have to have a perfect read in the market. You know, there will be times when I literally come to the market, I'm like, I'm confused. I don't really have a clear read. The intentions aren't clear. Like when price action was doing this at the time, was shopping around. That's when you have to do your best to just be a little bit patient and wait for the right moments to strike. But then you'll get times where price action is very, very clear, right? And it breaks out and you can see those movements and it becomes a lot easier to trade. And that's when you have to learn to be patient. But we'll get on again. We'll get onto that later on in the course. For now, what I want your brain to be focusing on and what I want you to be putting all of your energy into is understanding the rules as mechanical as possible and understanding the framework and how we use it together to have an expectation of price. Now, again, one key thing, and I'm going to try and keep repeating this throughout the whole course, is just because we have an expectation of what we think is most likely going to happen next, i.e. a strong low should hold and we expect it to hold until it doesn't, just because you have that expectation, it does not mean you have to trade it. Okay. So a prime example would be, yes, this is a strong internal low when price comes into it. And yes, we do get a bullish change of character. So yes, there's every possibility now that price could be ready to go and take out this high. But when you learn other confluence and you realize that, this has come into a decent supply level, we've had a swing pullback to premium prices and all these other things you're going to learn in multi-time frame analysis, you can realize that, well, actually, there's a pretty decent chance we're probably going to switch bearish in internal structure. So yes, I could see a trade here and yes, it could play out, but I want to be a higher strike rate trader. I don't really want to risk my capital in these moves. So I'm just going to see what happens next. And you're going to either wait for that to happen or you're going to wait for maybe some more development. And then, okay, maybe now I'm ready to buy and I'll buy up here, right? So again, just because you have the expectation that this should be a strong low and we've had a bullish chalk, it doesn't mean you have to trade it. Okay, it's kind of one thing I wanted to make clear. But yeah, I think that's kind of everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully that makes sense. So have a bit of practice with this, apply the charts. And what I recommend is you go through the theory videos again and watch this video on repeat until it really sinks in. In a month's time, come back and watch it again, because as your awareness expands, you will realize things that you missed on your first time through. Okay, but I'll leave it there. And yeah, hopefully you took some value from that. So you're probably absolutely